can you go out at 5:15?
You're like, it's cold.
Yeah, I know. I was like, okay. Let's watch more morning news than I ever do.
Yeah.
Some sort. They were like, it's St. Patrick's Day. I was like,
Oh,
good?
yes, reminder.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I guess it's 8:30, so we'll get started. So, my name is Chip Lichtenwalner. I'm a staff engineer with pre-construction, and I'll be your room host for this session. And we have two presentations lined up. They are Connecting Our Communities, Rural and Urban, presented by Grady McCollum from NCDOT, IMD. And then we have Complete Streets, Policy in Progress, presented by Joe Furstenberg from NCDOT, IMD, and Lauren Blackburn from BHB. So please join me in welcoming our presenters.
All right, great, thank you. So I know this presentation was Connecting Our Communities, Rural and Urban, and that's a lot of kind of what IMD does overall. And so this this presentation here is going to be a little more kind of an overall IMD overview, just kind of going through the stuff we're doing, what we're doing. We've got a lot of cool projects, a lot of cool work happening, and we got a big group that's pretty proud of it. So I wanted to go over a little more of that and give you guys a little more insight into what we're doing. Let's see if this thing's gonna work. Awesome. So I'll give you kind of an overview highlight, and then we'll jump into kind of four of our ongoing projects that are pretty interesting and fun to talk about, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So just real quick overview of what IMD is. We are the multimodal group. We do bike, ped, public transit, and our mission is to provide leadership for safe, affordable, and innovative multimodal transportation throughout North Carolina. So we're really working on trying to make sure people have access to safe ways to move about on bicycles and walking. We want to enhance quality of life, and we want to really ensure that we're doing it in a safe way. Understanding what are the safest ways for people to utilize bicycle facilities, utilize sidewalks and pedestrian facilities, utilize public transit, and do it safely. And that's a big piece of what we're doing here. That's how we get more people to use that facility. I know many of you, if you've been into an IMD presentation, have seen this slide or something very similar, but we are, trying to layer these services, thinking about how you get from, the hyper-local place with micromobility to between localities with, a local bus or a microtransit, moving regional with, a BRT or rail, and then finally interregional, getting into intercity bus, intercity rail, and connecting people to airports. And a lot of what we do that with is connecting them with mobility hubs, which we're going to talk about a little bit later here, as we've been doing a lot of this work recently. But really, they're just big connected spaces where a lot of different modes of travel can intermingle, and you can switch from one to another. And then we want to connect that through design. That's with things like Complete Streets, which Joe and Lauren are going to talk about here in a minute. And then finally, facilitating that with mobility as a service, really trying to think of how you can use one system to navigate through multiple different types of modes of transportation. How do you open Google Maps and go from a scooter to a bus to a train and get around? That's something that we are kind of always thinking about and trying to move forward. So those are kind of our four pillars of success. If we can get these four things going, we'll have a pretty successful, vast infrastructure of things to do. So again, public transit, this is a big part of IMD. We have two of our branches are mostly committed to public transit, and North Carolina has 100 different systems. That means that IMD acts as the pass-through for the funding for 100 different systems of public transit in the state, which is a lot of work. 35 of those are nonprofit systems, and many of these systems have, 1, 2, maybe 3 people working there to try to make things happen, or someone wearing multiple hats in, other parts of government, and then also doing the public transit on as a second part of their job. So it's a lot of work, and they're stood up by IMD to help them out. Going over IMD a little bit, this is, so we have 4 branches. So financing and grant administration, compliance and procurement, these are more of our very public transit center focused groups. that handle a lot of that pass-through funding, handle a lot of making sure that the public transit organizations don't run afoul of FTA, and they can get their reimbursements, they can buy new buses, they can do all of that kind of stuff. Planning and programming handles a lot of the regional and statewide planning projects, trying to figure out how we can make more bike plans and more bikeways, and where the next connections are, and where the next public transit plans are, where the microtransit should be, and stuff like that. And then program and project management is my branch, and we handle a lot of the implementation of these projects, kind of getting them from the planning stages into how do we get this into a project and make it go through NEPA? How do we get it into design? How do we start moving this forward into building? How do we find other funding? Because funding is always a really hard thing to do. That's a lot of what we work on in our branch. So it's kind of this, the four of us together all work really well in sync, trying to find all these things together, but it's sort of a process. Quick highlights. So this is finance. Again, what I want you guys to kind of take away from this is they process a ton of claims every year. So you're looking at, 100 transit agencies are sending in 1,300 to 1,400 claims a year trying to get their funding, and all of these have to go through and be reviewed and processed to make sure they don't run afoul of FTA rules. They also do a number of agreements every year for all of the different grants. If you ever hear about like the unified grant calls and stuff like that, that's all of our grants and finance group. Again, all of those things have to go through compliance, which means all of the procurement has to be in a way that is acceptable to FDA, acceptable to federal rules. We have a whole team of about 15 people that manage compliance work just to make sure that they don't run afoul. They're reviewing all of the purchasing, reviewing all of the new grants and things like that, making sure that everything stays on. They also go through a lot of the training and education. It's a lot of public transit, as you guys can probably imagine, has a lot of turnover. And so we're always running new training to make sure that these new public transit administrators are ready to go and understand the rules. Finally, planning, and the next is planning and programming, which has two branches under it. One is regional planning, which handles the state kind of in quarters, and then statewide planning does the overall bigger projects that'll be like intercity bus and transit demand management and things like that. The Great Trails state stuff all came through statewide planning as well. And then regional planning really gets into what are those local projects that we need to start focusing on so that we can move them into bike plans and things like that so that we can get them to be connected and connect their trails together. And then finally, program and project management. We have 3 branches under us. The first is programmatic management, and that's the group that handles kind of finding all of these projects that are in the regional plans, making sure we get track of them, making sure we're moving them into, moving them forward, moving them into production. If you hear us working on locally administered projects, or if you hear us working with some of the toll credit stuff we're doing, that's the group that's doing that, as well as a lot of the mobility hub projects and things like that. Then we have Joe's team that does complete streets, trails, and policy. And so all of the complete streets projects go through Joe's team, as well as all the recreational trails we're doing, and then trying to look at design standards and update those and make sure that we are getting the best that we can for those standards. Finally, our third group is transit innovations, and this is people that are doing microtransit, people that are doing autonomous shuttle work. If you hear about the CASI program, that goes in this group. They do kind of trying to find newer stuff and then push it through into implementation. You know, this is not a writing white papers group. This is a, how do we get this on the ground and try it out? So program highlights. We're gonna start with microtransit. Is everybody in here familiar with microtransit? Okay, so essentially these are sort of a publicly run Uber type system using typically minivans or even some of the larger 8-10 passenger buses, but also making sure you've got accommodations for wheelchair users and those people. But this is it's a system that has a lot of different kind of ways it can function. It has different understandings of what times they want to run it, how they want to run it, whether they want to run it from curb to curb, or if they want to go from an intersection to another intersection, if they want to have kind of virtual bus stops and run it on like modified routes. There's a lot of different ideas in microtransit. But the overall goal is to kind of shorten down these wait times where many of the fixed route buses in especially rural areas are running on an hour-long headway or even longer than that sometimes. Getting them something that's a little more convenient to use drives up that ridership. It comes with a cost though, because now we're talking about something that is not on a fixed route where it can just keep running. It's got to go and divert and all of that. And so really trying to figure out how you also get that software that can group rides together and pull them all so they're going together. So a couple years ago, we launched the Me&C program, and this was 11 different communities, 7 of which got software funding and operating funding, and the other 4 got turnkey. There are a couple of vendors out there that will whole cloth do a microtransit service for you, and you cut them a check and they run microtransit for you. There are others that the public transit agency themselves will want to do it themselves. There's pros and cons to both. One of the pros for having the vendor do it whole cloth is you cut them a check and they run the microtransit program. It's really nice. However, it changes how your funding is from FTA, and it changes some of your funding dynamics. If your public transit agency can do it, they already get money from FTA, so you get a little more of a recurring ability to stand up that program. So we're working through a lot of this. We've had, of these 11 communities that are in this, 10 of them have launched. One of them has not yet. That's Tar River Transit, which is working through some of Rocky Mount's current financial struggles. So but we expect them to launch here probably in the next month and a half. So we'll have all 11 of these systems launching, and they have done a ton of rides. The ridership has been really incredible. I think McDowell County in general, I think, has tripled their ridership from what they were doing with their paratransit thing. So it's been really great to see. Also, we've gotten a lot of. I don't think any two systems in this group have done it the same way, and so we're getting a lot of great information of what this can look like. The other thing you'll notice is that most of these areas are either rural or very rural, and so seeing what that can do in those more rural areas is really interesting, because that's where we have more issues getting people from place to place. That's where people are so much more car dependent. How do we, people that can't drive anymore, how do we get them into a way to go to the store, go to see loved ones, all that. So it's been a really great system. North Carolina in general is leading microtransit. I think we still have more microtransit systems than anybody else in the country. This map's old, September of 2025, so it's already old and out of date. But I think we broke 30 microtransit systems either in operation or getting ready to launch. So that's a significant amount of systems, and it's something that, going to national conferences, I haven't seen anybody come close to that number yet. So we've been doing a lot, and they've all been pretty successful. So it's a lot of advertising, it's a lot of getting the word out there, but it's great to see that we're able to connect people who are card efficient, basically. And then finally, this is in FY24, so you can increase these numbers quite a bit, but just since the start of microtransit, I think most of you probably are familiar with Wilson's microtransit. Wilson was one of the first ones. They started in 2020, and they've been extremely successful. But much of these numbers are from Wilson. However, these numbers have gone up quite a bit just because of the amount of systems that we have. So, and we're doing about 3.8 rider trips per hour now. So that's getting people that are connecting rides together as you're going. So it's not just a microtransit that's picking up one person, taking them to a spot, dropping them off, going to pick up another person, take them to a spot, but they're pooling rides together, which is driving the cost of the system down. And then finally, these are just from the Me&C grant. I want to highlight Buzzline is the one in Sanford, and that's a really interesting one that you guys should keep an eye on because the city of Sanford actually contracted with Lee County, the Colts transit operator, and had them run their microtransit service for them. And so we had one of those city-county partnerships that we've always kind of struggled with a little bit, and they've done huge numbers through that. And so it's been really cool to see sort of this new successful model of a city and a county partnering together and actually getting it done. Next up, S-Line Mobility Hubs. Is everybody familiar with the S-Line? We've talked about it a few times. All right. For those that aren't, the S-Line is this connection here that's going from Sanford to Raleigh and then Raleigh all the way up to Petersburg. So currently there are trains that run on the Raleigh, Cary, Sanford down to Hamlet tracks, but they don't stop in Apex or Sanford. The tracks going north from Raleigh are not there. Those tracks are not operational. So this all started with us getting a transit-oriented design grant and putting out these playbooks. If you haven't gone through these are some of my favorite transit-oriented design projects I've seen, reports I've seen. These playbooks are amazing to have something that's 5 or 6 pages you can give to a community and say, hey, this is what we're looking at. As part of a bigger package, this is what we're looking at. It also has policy updates that we recommend and things like that. It's a really good tool, and we've had a lot of success with them. And so those led into the Mobility Hub Planning Grants. So here we took, again, those 7 communities, not including Raleigh, and started really kind of putting together what those mobility hubs could look like. And something that we focused on a lot was connecting with the community and talking and figuring out how we make this a place that is a community connection point. This isn't a place where you go park your car, you go get on a train, you go to DC or whatever it is for a week, you come back, you pick your car up and you leave. We wanted a place where there's more going on. So there's places to just kind of be, coffee shops and gathering places and outdoor space and stuff like that. So you'll see in these renderings here, you can kind of see where that focus is on making sure that there's not just a parking lot to drop your car off and then go on, making sure that we're focusing on the type of transportation we want to see, which in downtown Wake Forest, what we don't want is a 2 city blocks of cars parked. We want to see activated space, and we'll park the cars somewhere else where they're out of the way a little bit. So making sure that space is activated and we're acting. If you look at the backside of the Wake Forest one, you may not be able to see it very well in this. Behind that bridge, at the top there is a drop-off area for Wake Forest has a great microtransit program, and also Uber and Lyft and a kiss and ride and that kind of stuff. So trying to just understand that those cars parked there are not spaces that we can economically develop anymore. So this helps a lot, especially in these rural areas that really need that space, and those downtowns just can't take a big surface lot like that. Norlina is a smaller community, but again, you see kind of that focus on activating as much of that space as possible. And then Sanford as well doesn't have the space for a big downtown parking lot area. So how do you still get people there, but not leave the cars there as well? Going to focus a little bit here on Wake Forest. So we have won the raised 2025 grant, and we've requested the build grant, and this is to do the complete construction. So we're working now to get ourselves all the way to building out this full design. Wake Forest is going to be the first set of tracks that rail finishes. So we want to try to have this thing up and running so they've got a place to get onto the train that they're going to get. And so that's really exciting. We're going through the NEPA process with all of these now. And it's really exciting to kind of see these things really start to get speed and get up and going and get towards construction. Moving on into multimodal planning. So again, this is the planning and programming group, and I want to highlight just the sheer amount of plans that they have put out in the last, 8 years or so. There's a lot here. They're currently getting ready to update what was previously the statewide bike plan, which is now going to be the active mobility plan. And they are, constantly. I think the call for planning grants is out now, so we're looking for a lot of new work there and a lot of new places that we can add to our bike network, our bike ped and transit networks. And finally is Fort Bragg mobility study. So Fort Bragg's kind of an interesting one. A military base is somewhat tailor-made for transit because it runs on a schedule. And you can't ask for a much better situation than something that runs on a pretty regimented schedule than have the buses follow the schedule around and take people where they want to go. But they have because of that, there's not a lot of need for cars on base itself, but getting out into Fayetteville and back into base, that's where we have a little bit of a disconnect. They don't have cars around base, so when they need time that's not on schedule, how do they move around? How do they get places? And so this is where we're working on standing up a microtransit there that will be helpful for getting them out and convenient for them getting out into Fayetteville to do shopping or have experiences or whatever it may be out there, and then come back into base and handling all of the security checkpoints and things like that that go along with that. So we should have the final plan out this summer, which I think is going to be really great. We've been working on it for about a year, a little less than 6 months now, I guess. But we're working on phase 2 now. So phase 1 is just completed. So now we're actually into phase 2 here. And again, this is a lot of the findings that I was talking about. But especially we're getting new recruits out of high school, people that are moving far away from home, and they just don't have the vehicles to get around. And so exploring microtransit and exploring additional connections there is really important for these folks. And that's it. I think we want to do questions at the end, or we want to do questions. If we got quick ones, I'll do a couple now, and then I'll pass it over. Anybody?
Grady?
Yes.
So how, for the micro transit, how are the customers interacting? Are they using an app or anything?
Yeah, so the question was for the microtransit. I'm reiterating questions because we're recording and they don't hear it unless it's in a microphone. So the question was for microtransit, how are they interacting with the service? And yes, they are doing it through an app. Each of these services generally has their own app. The couple companies that do like the turnkey service have been doing that for a while, and then the software we buy, it comes with app support. Yes.
I guess as it relates to the Wilson transit service, with the new baseball team that moved there, is there like any considerations with microtransit or something as it like for?
Ooh, I haven't heard. So the question was about Wilson and their new baseball team that moved in there, and if there's any connections there with the microtransit. And I haven't heard if there are any. I know we were talking with Wilson, and they mentioned that I think one thing that is nice is they're going to have sort of a consistent stop. And anytime you have a high volume stop on microtransit, it really helps because it's easier to pull rides. And so that's going to help a lot. But I don't know if they've done any like advertising tie-ins or anything like that. Yeah, they're getting brand new. I know they're very excited about their brand new stadium. So I'm sure there will be some stuff they're doing because the last time I talked to Wilson, we were talking about funding because they're just making sure that their funding is good. And when they went to city council like to talk about the funding, city council was like, just tell us what you need and we'll try to figure that out. Like they're very happy with their microtransit service, and it's been a big benefit in that community. So hopefully they'll be able to keep running it. Yes, sir.
On the mobility hubs for the S line, how do you see your group coordinating with the rail division on those mobility hubs?
Yeah.
Are you gonna be actively involved in that coordination?
Yeah, we have been. So the question was about IMD coordinating with the rail division on the S-Line mobility hubs. And yes, we have been actively involved. So kind of an interesting part of that is the mobility hub itself is not inclusive of the platform. And so the platform for rail has to be put attached to it. So we have to be able to, as we're designing these, make sure that all of the space for rail is there, plus all of the different considerations for Amtrak for if we're gonna have, we gotta have ticketing, we've gotta have, if we're gonna have luggage and stuff like that, if we're gonna have, if they're gonna have stowaway, that kind of stuff, then they gotta have a different set of, they gotta have different spacing. And then also just security for getting onto and off the platform. How do you control access so that people can't just walk up from the side of the road and get on a train? And so we have a meeting. I have a meeting with Rail Division once a week for about an hour to talk about S-Line and mobility hubs. So it's very consistent, ongoing. They are on the same floor as us in the highway building. So I just walk down the other corner of my building and there they are, and I can go and find everything out.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Just two quick questions. The community space that, is going to be part of the hubs, how did that come about? Was that done with a survey of transit passengers, or like how did that idea happen?
So the question is about how the community space for the hubs came about. And so we did a ton of in-person public engagement in the communities, especially in Sanford and Wake Forest, and all four of North Carolina and Henderson as well. We actually did design workshops in there. And so what we did was we kind of laid out the space of the site we were looking at, and we had them come and draw what a mobility hub could look like. We had an artist there that could help them draw it out and make it all work, or we had little placards that had space stuff. And it was funny, because we thought for sure everybody was going to draw these giant parking lots with a little building next to it that has a train station. And once you put the space requirement of a parking lot onto that square, you were like, well, now I don't get anything else I want. This stinks. So the parking almost always went away pretty quickly, which was just interesting. It was not what I was expecting. I was expecting people to try to squeeze it in, and so that was where a lot of that impetus for community gathering space, and it's something that they don't really have. I mean, you think about what's your free third space in a rural community? You don't there's not as many parks, there's not as many libraries, there's not places where they can do that. So giving them that was something they really liked and was really energizing for them.
I appreciate that. And just, I may have misunderstood, but if space is at a premium, how are you going to accommodate parking?
So the question was about if spaces at a premium, how to accommodate parking. Many of these communities have done parking studies. I know Wake Forest has, and Wake Forest, because of their parking study, is building a parking deck about less than a quarter mile away from where the hub's going to be. So I know Wake Forest is one that, we're thinking about. Franklinton is going to actually add some parking with the mobility hub. But the other part of it was if you're thinking of how that situation, how the mobility hub's kind of set up, one thing that was liked from a lot of communities was try to get the parking that's like a car parking that's probably going to be there for a while. Put that farther away from where the activated center of the hub is. Save that for electric vehicle parking, bike parking, pedestrian areas, ADA parking, because you got to have that close by. But just the regular general parking, push that as far out as you can to make that area more desirable. And that was a very popular take on a lot of those. So, yes, we understand that there's always going to be a need for parking there, but being smart about how you place it can really help out and maximize your services.
Thank you.
With that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Joe and Lauren, and then we should have time at the end for additional questions. But thank you all.
There's a folder on the desktop. There's a lot of seats up in this corner if anybody wants to come.
Yeah, breaking the fourth
Front
wall.
row, Joe.
Come to the front. That's really why it's taking me so long.
Come on, class.
Come on up, come on up. Well, good deal. Well, good morning. Good to see everybody wearing green. Most of you, if you aren't, I'm sorry. I just told you that you're not wearing green. It's St. Patrick's Day. Going to talk a bit about complete streets, and Grady's presentation really sets us up well, building off of IMD in general and the mobility hubs, and that slide that he had about our 4 sort of areas that we focus on. And so connecting mobility hubs with complete streets is part of our strategy. So going to talk through some of that this morning. There we go. Quickly, and not to say the same things that Grady said, but building off of, and the Complete Streets program in general builds off of IMD's goals and our mission for the state and for the work that we do of increasing access, enhancing quality of life, and ensuring safety. I did just want to, at a high level, talk about the development timeline for Complete Streets as we get into this presentation and really set the stage for that. So 2009 was actually the first iteration of the Complete Streets policy that was passed. I joined NCDOT in 2018. In 2018, 2019, we worked to update that Complete Streets policy, really build it into the other programmatic areas of NCDOT. And then, of course, we had the IMD merger from Bike Ped to Public Transit coming together to become IMD, building up our support and resources, and then continuing on through the implementation of Complete Streets and the Complete Streets review program that we have and manage to provide an evaluation methodology and a structure and a system for how we receive and how we send back those review requests. And then as we move into work that we've done most recently and work that we have upcoming, so working through updated guidance for complete streets and maintenance projects and a pilot project that we have that's just kicked off with Division 5, and then working through some other practitioner and design related resources for design flexibility and process and practitioners support as they navigate through this program. So again, just to kind of set the stage for why we do what we do in the state of North Carolina in general. So, communities of color, nearly 3 times as likely to live in a household without a car, as indicated on the map that we have here. You can really see, the urban clusters and sort of where that density is, and that I think that makes sense. But as you look at the state overall, there is that spread all across the state. So this is something that, we do look at a statewide level. We review projects in all 100 counties, all divisions, to help support. And of course, that's going to be done in various different ways, as you'll see. Over 60% of our transit riders are people of color. Estimated around 1 million North Carolinians that don't own a vehicle. January, we got some updated ACS data, so we're pulling all that in now. And then the bottom on their average commute time by transit, nearly 45 minutes compared to just 24 minutes by car. So trying to narrow that gap, bring things together. Here's a similar map that you just saw of our public transit systems. So bringing those together as well and coordinating with our transit systems as we coordinate with NCDOT in general on our highway projects and how we can work together to help support each other. Also, a similar map that you just saw, but this time with a QR code. So if you're interested in the planning grant applications, that runs through April 16th, by the way. So if you or a community are interested in that program, those applications are open now, so definitely share that far and wide. It's a very popular program each year, so we're excited to be able to offer it again. And then just supporting the, and reiterating the goals of Complete Streets, and this, the quote and everything comes from the policy language itself as it was adopted in 2019 by the board. But of course, we're looking to reduce pedestrian crashes and unsafe conditions, to improve access and mobility for those without a vehicle, enhance quality of life by providing those different transportation choices, and ensuring that NCDOT has an equitable transportation system that works for everyone. So in the project examples that we're going to go through and that Lauren's going to help talk us through, I think you'll see the various different ways in each division and each of the projects that we're going to highlight that we were able to accomplish these goals. provide this slide to illustrate and go over that it's just not an IMD thing. Complete Streets is an NCDOT policy, NCDOT wide, and we work with hand in hand closely with multiple different divisions and partners internal to the department and even some external on how we can work to improve this program, make it a success, and get it implemented, making sure that we have standard drawings that meet the needs of today and what we're seeing from a transportation demand, especially from a multimodal infrastructure standpoint, making sure that we have, like I said, the standard drawings, guidance in the roadway design manual, things like that. So working together with all those different units, and several of you in the room today that I've worked with closely over the years and helped to get this program to where it is today. And so again, a little bit of how did we get to where we are. We're coming from all the way from 2019 to today. So what you'll see here as we go through the next couple of slides and as we go through the projects, I do just want to say, just make sure we're setting the stage for everything, is just keep in mind that 2019 was the change and updating the policy, so think about the projects and the project timelines. So we're just now seeing some of the projects getting through and being constructed. So what you'll see are some of those projects that went through the very earliest days, and oftentimes some that were projects that transitioned from the old policy to the new policy in times. So you'll see that as we go through, and that's something that we're going to continue to monitor and track as projects get constructed and implemented from the project development stage into construction, and so we'll continue to track this. But like I said, we're seeing some of those early projects coming out now, and so we're going to talk through some of those. So this is the system that we work within. If you're in project management or project delivery, you've definitely seen this. But I did just want to highlight that we do have, so there's a IMD stage, a step in each stage of the PDN process. With two being in the first one, that first one is more of an express design focus, of course, and then moving forward into project initiation. Second stage is we're looking at design elements and thinking through what facilities are appropriate and meet the needs and ADA and everything from that standpoint. And then the newest steps are in 3 and 4, and those are really less of a review stage and more just a tracking type stage for IMD staff and for the department overall to see where things are. We're able to help again in stage 3 if we're looking at pavement marking designs and making sure that we're all good there and meeting all the fund standards for MUTCD and ADA and all the things like that. And then of course the fourth one there again is just sort of collecting that data, making sure that we're keeping track of the projects that go through the system and how they develop and ultimately how they result and get constructed. This is that process that we use, the methodology process that we use for the evaluation for reviews, for project reviews that we get. It's a 5-step process that lives within the PDN and gets updated as we go through that, as the project builds and we get more data and resources for a project and understand more about what's there and what that looks like and the implications for facility selection, transportation need, and things like that. And of course, all the different impacts that we help navigate through with our project management partners of everything that you could think of. We've seen it all. There's all sorts of muscles that are protected that you have to watch out for. Learned a lot about that. So all the various different things that you can think through. But this is an overview of that 5-step process that we use. So the fun part of what we're going to get into and what Lauren's going to help walk us through is how are we doing and what do some of these initial projects that we built look like from that complete street standpoint.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so I'm going to talk about how we're doing. As Joe just mentioned, several of the projects that we see on the ground today really started their journey many, many years ago. But we did make an attempt at looking at those projects that we would define as having been subject to the new policy starting in 2019. We went through that review process for a couple reasons. One, that helps IMD have a better idea about what opportunities there are for better communication, for better project delivery, but also in that very famous flow chart, you might have noticed there are some boxes under the stage 3 and stage 4. That's relatively new for IMD in that arena. You may ask, what are they going to be doing in that stages of the project delivery process? At stage 3, their focus is really on making sure that they're communicating well with the project development team, to refine the project designs, to look at the final plans, even participate in the CFI meetings, to really provide that meaningful input. Stage 4, obviously the projects have already gone through the course and finalized the design, but IMD would like to document how the decisions were made and what the final outcomes were, so there can be that retrospective review of how the projects have been developed. So what we did is we looked at all of the projects that have met the basic criteria. Was it after that 2019 date, as said in the Complete Streets policy? Was it reviewed by IMD? A very good chance it was. If you can see the numbers here, IMD has been very busy over the last few years. They've provided over 1,500 comments on projects across the state. At many stages of the project development process, I know many of you, if you've been managing a project, your project may have kind of started in the middle. They've tried to catch those, but if you've started at the beginning, they're really kind of providing as much feedback as they can throughout the process. So that accounts for a lot of the comments that were submitted. If you're familiar with the Smart Sheets approach, who in here has used the Smart Sheets approach for a Complete Streets submittal to IMD? Good. If you have any questions, please ask Joe. I'm sure he'd love to make sure you know how to get access to that. That is the main tool that they use for both providing the comments to the projects as well as receiving any feedback. So it's really important that you have access to that tool. So we looked at their comments that had been submitted, and if you think about it, the tool didn't even exist until 2021-ish to 22. So they've been really busy. So looking for projects that have started their course after 2019, IMD had a comment for it and has already gone to either let or construction. That did limit our field quite a bit. There's been a lot of things that influenced the number of projects that were delivered over the last few years, of course, so it was a relatively small sample. But the really good news is all of the projects that were subject to the Complete Streets policy that IMD had an opportunity to review incorporated some elements of the Complete Streets approach into the projects. I think that's a huge win. There's still a lot of room to grow in terms of improvements, and none of the projects are perfect. A lot of times we have right-of-way constraints and funding limitations as well. But I think the really good news here is that there seems to be a really good progress made with the policy. So we only expect that that's going to continue to progress. And so if you have any feedback for IMD about how to help them improve how they can document those decisions, of course, even being more involved in the latter stages of project development, I think they would be really open to learning about any thoughts you have about that. In addition to reviewing how the projects have been done, we also wanted to know what kinds of projects have been developed. So we reached out to all the divisions and asked them for examples of projects that they have delivered, NCDOT has delivered, so this would not include locally administered projects, that have some Complete Streets element and have been let or constructed within the last 5 years. Again, it's not an enormous pool of projects, but I think we were very pleasantly surprised by the diversity of project types out there. So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of each of the projects that we're going to highlight from each of the divisions. There were certainly more than one from each division. These are the favorites. If we were to have an Oscar show for Complete Streets, I guess we could say that these are the nominees. I have my favorites, but I'm not going to announce any awards. So the first one, I think, is probably the most unique. This is, if we were thinking about this in terms of the timeline, Joe mentioned this very well, a lot of these projects started even before the formal policy. But if this was the Yellowstone trilogy of this is 1887. So in Division 1, the ferry service, as you all probably know, they implemented a new passenger ferry service around 2019. And one thing that they needed to do, and this was between the Hatteras and Ocracoke Island. So one thing they needed to do is improve the pedestrian access at the terminals on both the sending and the receiving ends of that new ferry service, because this is a pedestrian-only service. How many of you have used this particular ferry service, getting from Hatteras to Ocracoke? So as you may know, they have also the vehicle ferry passenger service, which had its challenges. It had some difficulty navigating the channels to get to Ocracoke. So they implemented this just to provide that additional service. They also implemented some other pedestrian bicycle improvements as well. They added shelters like you see here for the passengers while they're waiting on the ferry for the ferry service to operate. They've got bicycle parking at both of the ends. They've got bicycle storage on the ferry vessels themselves. And as a result of that, it increased passenger trips exponentially, not just because they added a new service, but because it just allowed for more people to be able to get from point A to point B more quickly. So if you've ever used any of the services, you may know that this directly brings you to the heart of the village. The alternative service does not do that. So you've got to still find a way to get into a vehicle to get around to Ocracoke. So as another indirect or direct result of this also resulted in the island itself presenting different services. So a tram service is now operating, picking up people at the village terminal, and now it's providing a transit service. There's a whole lot more golf carts on the island from what we've been told, and a lot more bike share services as well. So it's just created this synergy about a much more energized multimodal feel on the island. And my understanding from Division 1 and the Ferry Division when we talked to them is now this is a really big reason why they're looking at implementing the similar type service on one or two other routes in the ferry system. So I think this is a great floating complete street, if you want to call it that. Division 2, this is in Washington. This project, and there's a good chance that a percentage of y'all have been involved in this project at one stage or another. We'll put this in the 1923 era of the Yellowstone trilogy. It's been around for a while. It's had a lot of different eyes on it, and a lot of this is just due to the feedback from the community itself, just trying to get everybody on board about what is the right thing to do when you have a main artery and we don't have all the information. One thing I should have mentioned, when the complete streets are thoroughly vetted, they're going to be posted on IMD's website, so you can see more about each of these examples with maps and so forth. But 15th Street, if you're familiar in Washington, is essentially a major collector that runs along and through Washington. So it's a major road, but it was also important that they had the complete streets elements. As a result of the design decisions, what they decided to implement was a sidewalk on one side and a shared use path on the other that helped limit and narrow the footprint overall, but also provide all types of mode accommodations in the community. Division 3, this is maybe more in the 1887 era as well, but this is a part of the Military Cutoff Extension Project, which is fully constructed. It's a multi-mile corridor. If you're familiar with Wilmington, you know that Military Cutoff starts in Wilmington and heads north for several miles. So they worked with the city of Wilmington and New Hanover County to identify what the appropriate multimodal needs are. There is a multi-use path along the full length of this corridor. Now, this is not a small, insignificant arterial. There's approximately 40,000 plus vehicles per day on this road. So they had to be very strategic about where the crossings would be located and what they would do to help implement that. So what they did is they identified things like parks and other community centers for those strategic crossing locations. And they implemented a crossing treatment like you see on the bottom right photo, those Z crossings, because all of the intersections are treated through that RCUT type device, the restricted conflict intersection improvement. And I think this is a good example of we can include these multimodal improvements in those intersection types. The other thing that I think is very unique about this project, it's kind of hard to tell in the upper right-hand photo, there's at least one instance where the crossing treatment, and I'm a big ped crossing dork, but half of the crossing is what's called a pedestrian hybrid beacon, and the other half is a signal. This, as far as I'm aware, might be the only treatment like this in North Carolina, and it does make sense why it was implemented this way. So if you want to go on a road tour with me or others to go check out interesting crossings, this is a good one to put on your road trip. All right, Division 4. I think this is a great example of a rural implementation of a complete streets. This is in Tarboro, or rather, it starts in Tarboro and goes well outside of Tarboro. The decision here, and obviously this project is still under construction, you literally see the shared use path being laid on the outside of the guardrail on the overpass. They've decided to implement a multi-use path on the outside of the bridge. A large stretch of this corridor does not have a lot of development, but Edgecombe County College is well outside the town, but there's also a strong need to connect people to the heart of Charborough, so they implemented the shared use path. And I think this, again, is a good example of we can implement complete streets in those much more rural contexts. Division 5, several projects we had to consider there, but this one I think is a really unique one in Durham. It's on Alston Avenue. Alston Avenue is really in the heart of Durham. It's in a disadvantaged community. It had a lot of pedestrian activity, but it also was very constrained in terms of the footprint. So the decision here was, how can we manage speeds, add in the multimodal features that were not there before, and also provide for the multimodal access, as well as implementing a new bridge overpass. So the decision here was really focusing on the crossings. They added what's called the rectangular rapid flashing beacon at multiple of the crossing locations, added in new refuge islands, bike lanes. So it really kind of helped add in the new features, but did not expand the footprint in a large way. And then, of course, the bridge replacement itself included a lot of these new features over the bridge. Division 6, this is in Pembroke. This one and a couple others I think are also unique in that they started as a safety project. There was a lot of other needs to be implemented, so it became a larger, not just traditional safety project. This includes 2 roundabouts, I think a dozen crossings, and the key feature here was not actually really focusing on the pedestrian needs, although that was a driving force, was improving the overall traffic flow while also implementing a road diet. So it had been a 5-lane cross-section. It was reconfigured to a 2-lane divided cross-section with bike lanes, multiple crossings, but the roundabouts were a huge part of the ability to keep the traffic flowing while also just managing the overall speeds. This has been evaluated by the Safety Division as part of their evaluation program. And if you're familiar with Pembroke, UNC Pembroke is on one side of this road, and a lot of the students were crossing the road. So it is expected to have some improvements in terms of pedestrian safety, but the focus here really was on the intersections as well. Division 7, Franklin Street. This one is a little different than some of the others in that it was not a large TIP project. It was a resurfacing project. Some of you may have heard Chuck Edwards in the town of Chapel Hill present on this project before. What started again as a resurfacing project became a wholehearted multimodal improvement. This triggered several different conversations between the division and the town, who was going to pay for a lot of these improvements. So they came up with a very creative funding strategy. There really wasn't a policy in place for how much the town would need to pay for a resurfacing improvement, but they came up with something that worked for both parties. Something else, of course, this is Franklin Street. This is a high pedestrian traffic corridor, and also on-street parking. There were no bike lanes before, but they're also very heavy transit. So this meant that there was just a lot to try to pack into a relatively small space. And with it having a high density of intersections and buildings very close, we had limited sight distance. So one thing that they've talked about this particular project is that they exercised design flexibility in terms of the sight distance restrictions. They had very limited sight distance, so they had to go outside the norm for what they would consider to be the required sight distance. So they applied some flexibility that meant that they restricted parking, but also the bike lanes that you see here that have been implemented helped improve some of that sight distance. So it does include a lot of new features that we're seeing in some of the newer projects. You see what's called the bike box, that bright green box at the front. That's implemented at almost all of the intersections on the corridor, as well as the conflict markings with the green-colored pavement. And then, of course, the bus lanes are, there's some floating bus islands, as they're called, to help bus users and bicyclists more or less stay out of the way. So this one has got a lot going on with what started really as a very simple resurfacing project. Division 8, this is a brand new road. Chatham Park, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. It's a major development outside of Pittsboro. So this is an example of when the division and the town of Pittsboro and all of the developer parties needed to determine what is the right cross-section. This is what they ended up implementing. It's going to include multi-use path on both sides of the road. This is a major bypass around Pittsboro as well. So it was important to keep the users, the bicyclists and pedestrians, separated completely. And given that they had the new space to be able to do that, they were able to implement this. So this is also another creative funding program with the developers, of course, providing a substantial amount of the funding and implementing a lot of the project. Division 9. This is, I think it was this part of the Salem Parkway was implemented and finalized a couple of years ago. There's still more phases of this project to go. This project actually has already been awarded, so if this was the Oscars, we've already got an awardee. This is a very unique one in that the intent, of course, was to improve US 21, what was formerly called Business 40, to upgraded standards for essentially achieving an interstate status design. But there was also the need by the city of Winston-Salem to provide bike and ped connectivity. So several things were implemented in this project. There were new bridges added, but I think the most unique part of this is that given the very limited right-of-way, DOT allowed for, when you can see it in this picture, portions of the multi-use path to actually go into the right-of-way and the control access areas, which meant that they had to be very creative about how they were going to implement the retaining walls and a lot of the other design features. So I would also add this to your road trip. It is interesting. It's significantly, I should have put a video in here. It's well above the major highway, but it allows the bicyclist pedestrian network to really seamlessly flow along and across the roadway. And then you get some pleasant views of Business 40. Division 10. This one is in the 1887 category. This is actually several years old, but one of our existing examples and things that we're still learning from of how you can include bicyclists and pedestrians into several types of alternative intersections. So if you're familiar with Gilead Road, US 21 in Huntersville, that is sort of a two-part interchange series. There's a diverging diamond interchange at the interstate, and there's also a median U-turn intersection at the adjacent intersection. So this is got a lot going on here, right? We have a very complex traffic operation. You can tell in the picture on the upper left, they did, for portions of it, included bike lanes in through the interchanges, but we also have a series of those channelized turns and the median islands to help separate pedestrian crossings. So again, a good example of how we can include these bicyclist pedestrian features in these alternative intersection designs. I think that, there's still some lessons to be learned about what would we do today. Could be more of a separated bikeway network. But I think that, again, we have some good examples to lay the groundwork on. Division 11, and this is in Wilkesboro, so we'll put this in the sort of rural context as well. This, you can't tell as well from, but you can see in the roadway drawings that this is really a super street, a series of road reduced conflict intersections. That was the intent. It was really focused on access management, but also at the same time recognizing that there was a Walmart on one side, a lot of residential needs for crossings. They've implemented They will implement the crossings with the Z crossing and the crossing signals at each of those major intersections. And they've got the sidewalk network along the roadway as well. So again, in a more rural setting, able to implement those complete streets. Division 12, this one has not yet begun construction, but we have some very nice renderings to look at. This is Wilkinson Boulevard, over the bridge over the Catawba River between Charlotte and Gastonia. Again, it's going to include a series of reduced conflict intersections, but the real star of this is going to be the bridge itself. The decision here was not just to add a multi-use path on the bridge, but also to make sure that we have a firm vertical separation. So we've got the vertical barriers on both sides. This is a fairly wide multi-use path on both sides of the bridge as well, and that will connect into another shared use path system on both sides of the bridge, connecting to other community colleges and a lot of other community centers. So looking forward to this one getting built. Division 13, Merriman Avenue. This was, we'll say, pushing the boundaries in terms of our road diet comfort levels. And so Merriman Avenue, if any of you are familiar with this project, has been implemented and has been studied extensively in terms of what the traffic impacts and the safety benefits have looked like. The evaluation was performed by the Traffic Safety Unit. And so if you're familiar with this is in Asheville. The ADTs, if I remember correctly, are somewhere around 20,000 vehicles per day. There's more? Okay, I was going to say, I'm sure there's somebody here. 25? Okay, wow. So high volume roadway, right? However, in a constrained area. So the decision was made to pilot a road diet on Merriman Avenue. So there was data collected before, data collected afterwards. And the project is now, from my understanding, and you may have a better understanding, it's completed. So we do have this example, again, a high volume roadway road diet project in Asheville. There's a lot of studies. If you are interested, you Google the Merriman Avenue road diet, you'll find that safety evaluation study, which did measure a substantial reduction in crashes, which is what they're looking for. So there are agreements in place if there are ever any future challenges. But I think this one is a good success of testing out something and then monitoring the before and after and making sure that it's going to achieve the goals of the project. In Division 14, this of course is in a very rural part of the state as well. This project is really the culmination of 2 or 3 projects together. One of those projects is the multi-lane roundabout. This is the first one that is implemented in Division 14. And when you have multi-lane roundabouts, you have to pay particular attention to how the crossings are being treated. Now the standard is not just having signs and markings, but we've got to have some other traffic control devices along with them. You can also tell that there is a wide shared use path being implemented alongside the roundabout, and that's being connected into other projects that are happening in Division 14. Then there's also a bike lane as part of the adjacent project. So this is really 3-in-1 complete street, but a great example of how we can implement bike and ped improvements into even large multi-lane roundabouts. So that is just one for each of the divisions. As we said, if there was an Oscar show, we could have had a lot more nominees. And I'm sure y'all have some examples of projects as well that you think would be worthy of highlight. So I would say if you have any ideas or suggestions, please pass those on to myself or Joe. We'd like to have a really good catalog of what's possible, so we have those as examples. And if any of you know more about any of the projects, we'd love to hear more about your experience with those as well. So I think that's it for us. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
Would you mind going back to Division 4 slide, please? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I saw something correct.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, correct me if anything was wrong. Yes.
Joe, I've got a question for you. Looking at Division 5 on the division managed projects, some of the big ones, but really my question is about small intersection improvement projects that may just be a turn lane. Really just maybe that, or to extend 500 feet past the intersection. Do some very small bridges, division bridge management projects, and a couple of pipe replacement projects that could be maintenance, but are kind of a step above because of the size of the pipes. So we've been dealing with IMD for 5-6 years now very successfully, and we were getting into a process where we would do stage 1 and stage 2, and we would submit stage 2. We submit the plans because we can't sit on that for years. We have to identify that really quickly. And so in coordination with your group, spot where stage 3 might not be necessary because we've done everything at that point. Again, this was really 2 years ago before it got to even 4 IM1. So it kind of got these small projects that we think everything's ready, and then we've got these big ones like you think like big division projects that we don't have to be taken. Is there a threshold? And the answer doesn't matter to us. We just need to know what the answer is on these small projects that are like an intersection project. Do we need to take it to 3 IM1? It's really just a factual basis question that I can take that and it's just 4 IM1. So like, is there a threshold that this fits, but then you need to do this? Because we're really just trying to, you know, we do scoping, we do scope and net estimates all the time. What's your belief on stopping at 2 IM1 or maybe going to 3 or some and 4 to the other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you mentioned, a lot of those projects that are a lot smaller in that scale, really after that stage 2 review, there's not too much else, like you mentioned, to go through. And really the intent for adding the formal 3 and 4, stage 3 and stage 4 review is more of that, like capturing the data of the projects moving forward. So yeah, there's, in most instances, I can imagine there's very little that will happen from like a review or change point at that point for projects. But it is also that opportunity as we're doing pavement markings and things like that. If we need to discuss or weigh in or review something in particular, then that opportunity is there. But yeah, there will certainly be, and I don't think a little bit of this is still getting fleshed out a little bit, but in terms of like action and what will be delivered back, there isn't anything at 3 and 4 that is part of the review. That's mainly focused in 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 are more on that tracking and just seeing how projects develop.
So what's your overall guidance that we could stop at 2 on some, go to 4 on the other, and maybe rely on you guys to give us guidance?
Right. Yep. And that will be forthcoming. We're developing out the specifics of. For the 3 and 4, the specifics of what's happening at that step, and all of that will be mainly focused on IMD staff versus the project teams. It's to indicate that you're at that point in the project development, so that gives us the indication of what to look at.
The second question is, we have a PF that just did an IMD stage 2 submittal, I guess, earlier this week, and she checked that box, said please reply, and that email didn't get generated. Was that maybe just a broken issue on that project, or it's the first time that we haven't received that back?
Oh yeah, from the Smart Sheet form. Yeah, we got that submission that they reached out and we checked that. I can check into that. That would be a Smart Sheets function of sending the response that you submit to it. But that is to kind of building off of that a little bit. We are, so of course, continually trying to improve and do the process better. And so part of that, we've had it as an option when you submit a review request to indicate if you want to have a meeting or anything. As we are starting the review, we're going to be more intentional about that, about reaching out to the project managers when our reviewers and the review team that I have, when they are starting that review, reaching out and having that touch point of, I'm getting started on a review, this is what you provided, is there any other context, that sort of thing, to build off of. But yeah, that was a Smart Sheets function, so we're checking into it, but yeah, we'll make sure we get that.
Last thing I'll say is we still struggle with small, isolated intersection projects that are not sorted by anything, and maybe have sensitive areas on one side, and it's like, we get the policy, but it's difficult.
It is.
To understand the context.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the smaller projects, like you said, intersection or just like safety projects that have more of a limited scope, we definitely see a lot of those. A lot of and as we've worked together, some of these have turned out this way as well, where instead of putting in the facility, we're preserving that right-of-way space and things like that. So we've been able to do that, definitely being cognizant and understanding the limited scope and budget of those project types, but then also trying to make sure we aren't creating any barriers for future corridor projects that will touch on that and things like that. And also not trying to put us in a position where we might have to tear something out that we just put in recently and things like that. So, yeah, all of the projects, and that's probably the most challenging thing, is that they all have their different nuances and challenges and require sort of that touch to go through each one individually. So it makes it pretty hard to like apply anything blanketly, but taking that in and that context-sensitive approach has really been the way to move a lot of these forward. Mm-hmm.
Here's this for you, Joe. The slide back there where you had the map that showed all the various municipal plans,
Mm-hmm.
did you coordinate with? What about ADA transition plans? Is that part of the mix? Because I've been involved in doing some of those ADA transition plans, and it's been a mixed bag as far as some of the municipalities actively implement.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the municipalities could kind of put them on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
But then also through the TAP program, a lot of that implementation is done through the TAP program. So I guess I'm wondering, how does that work in the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't speak too much for the planning team folks, but I know that is something that they will incorporate into the plans. If it's something that they know and they want to approach with the municipality doing that planning project, they'll incorporate that into that. And then when it gets to sort of the project development point of that we look at those plans, and if it's in part of a larger plan, we'll look at those elements as well as we're doing a review. And if it's something that we can, ensure from that ADA perspective that we're being very intentional and making sure we incorporate in the project, that's definitely what we want to do. But yeah, that's a big piece of it, that especially from the ADA standpoint, we've got to make sure that we are doing the right things and we've got the right dimensions and all that sort of stuff, so it gets really into the weeds. Yeah, I know that I don't know to the extent that the planning team goes into that same level, but I know they take that into consideration as they're putting it together.
Okay, the reason I was asking primarily because we're currently doing some TAP projects, conceptual designs up in Division 11,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see where they probably correlate with the municipality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I was kind of asking the question, to see how much IMD is involved with that.
Sure, gotcha. Any others?
Any other questions? Okay.
Is it NUP or
Both.
I'll never say. It is interchangeable, and I don't know if it is worth the fight to try to land on one specific one because they change so much, but essentially they operate the same way.
Sure.
There is a little difference for a side path, but to throw a third one in there. But NUP, SUP, interchangeable.
And is there any reason you would need a separate bike lane when you have a shared use path on the project already?
It's a great question. It would depend a lot on the project area and sort of what they're seeing from that multimodal standpoint. I could say with pretty good confidence that would be something where we, from an NCDOT standpoint, would be looking for betterment costs for a municipality, because that's kind of the Cadillac version of things, having a shared use path and a separate bike lane. But it's not to say that that doesn't exist out there, that it would be appropriate. It would just need to be evaluated to make sure that would match what design guidance would call for, and then we'd have to have that conversation on the pricing and cost of everything. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That's good.
Did pretty good. 2 minutes.
Hello.